If you got a first date coming up, chances are high that you've got a million and one different things running through your brain that you're thinking about or that you're worried about. And guess what? That is completely normal. Most people, if not everybody, goes through that, especially if you're about to meet up with someone who you've never met with in person before. One of the biggest things that people worry about when it comes to a first date is, how am I going to keep the conversation going? How am I going to prevent those awkward silences that just kind of burn from the inside and make you feel like the date's not going well? Well, today, that's what I want to talk about. And specifically, I want to share 4 things that you can do to help prevent those awkward silences. Now, before we jump into those 4 things, I do want to ask a question that I think is pretty important to this topic. And it's, is silence that bad, right? If you have a first date and you've got these big pockets where no one's talking, does that automatically mean that you both are incompatible and it was a terrible first date? I think, to me, the answer to that is no, right? I play the guitar, and I remember I took lessons from a very, very talented guitar player who shared a story with me. He basically said, a solo, which is when you're kind of showing off on the guitar, it's not about how many notes you can cram into the 30 seconds that you have, but it's about the quality of the notes that are there. And, so I think the important kind of frame of this whole discussion that we need to take on is, it's not how do we get the most words into our date, but it's how do we get the most quality conversation into the date, even if that has some pockets of silence. So take that as the lens. Let's go ahead and jump into 4 ways that you can help to prevent awkward silences on a first date. So the first one is, choose the right kind of date. If you're someone who struggles with conversation, right, it's hard to kind of keep that conversation going. Don't choose a date where you and your date are isolated, where it's quiet, where there's not a lot going on around you, where it's an inactive date, where there's not, environmental conditions that you can use to help spark conversation or to kind of break some of that monotony. There's a reason that people like places like coffee shops and bars and things like that for first dates. And it's because there's a lot going on. And so when there's a, maybe there's a pause in the conversation, it's not just eerily quiet, right? It's not as awkward if, let's say, you decided to go for a walk for your first date, or you decided to go for a picnic where you're outside and there's just nothing else going on. So when you pick your date, right, choose something that's active, choose something that's interactive, and choose something that potentially has other people, not so much like a double date, but other people involved. Like, if you go to a restaurant where the waiters are always coming over to the table, that can kind of also help to cut that tension a little bit. Number 2 is, have some questions prepared. All right, there's nothing wrong with preparing for a first date. Anything else you do in life that's super important, generally you'll prepare for it. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with taking a little time to come up with some questions where you're like, all right, if it gets quiet, I'm going to ask them about this. And I think the idea of approaching this is not, these are just going to be there to fill the space, but think about it like, man, if I get a quiet moment, I'm excited to be able to ask them this question, to get to know this aspect of them. And then that kind of helps to shape your mind, where you're not going into the date thinking the whole time, watch for the silence, right? You're thinking, man, I hope I get an opportunity to ask these questions. And if you're trying to think of good questions to ask, we do have an article that we wrote where we listed out a ton of these questions. So I will link to that in the description box below if that's something that you want to check out. I do recommend having at least some prepared that you're excited about actually getting the answer to. The third thing, is that you need to understand that it takes 2 to tango, right? A lot of times when there's awkward silences, we tend to put that pressure on us and we say, it's my job to fill that silence. It's my job to make the conversation. And because it's quiet and it feels awkward, it's my fault that that's happening. And it's not the case, right? A conversation involves 2 people. And so it's not so much a tip and like something that you can take and actionably do, but it's a mindset shift, right? And I think that kind of helps to take some of the pressure off while you're on the date, right? Where it's you're already thinking that silence is not all that bad, but now you're also thinking, hey, even if you're struggling with that, it's not your fault. So that's number 3. And number 4 is listen and let them talk. I think what people tend to do is someone will share something and they'll immediately go to the next topic because they're nervous and they're not really listening to what the person is saying. And what you do is if you jump topics every 20 seconds, every 30 seconds, you end up burning through a lot of topics, especially kind of some of the standard first date topics. I'll give you an example, right? If you're on a date and you say, oh, what do you do for a living? And they say, I'm a baker. And you say, cool. What do you like to do for fun? So what you did is you now jumped to that next topic and you got about 10 seconds of utility out of asking them what they do for a living. And you also really didn't learn a whole lot about them, right? They're a baker, but that's about it, right? And so learning how to ask good follow-up questions, right? So, hey, what do you do for a living? I'm a baker. Oh, very cool. Do you enjoy it? Yeah, blah, blah, blah. What's your favorite part about being a baker? Blah, blah, cinnamon rolls. Is there anything you would change about your job? Like, is that what you always wanted to do from time you were little? Did you, do you bake recreationally, like on the side for fun? What's the best thing you make, right? If you think about all those questions, right, now you can ask them what they do for a living. And instead of it being a 10-second thing, now you talk about it for 5-10 minutes. And you're getting a lot of utility out of that question, but you're also really getting to know them. And what's neat then is they can kind of turn around and follow suit and say, hey, what do you do for a living, right? Did you always do that? Do you enjoy it, right? What would you change about your job? And so finding those unique opportunities to have follow-up questions ready, I think is really good. And what's cool is like, you don't have to think through every instance. Like, okay, if they say they're a baker, this is what I'm gonna do. If they say they're a carpenter, these are my questions, right? Or if we're talking about jobs, these are my questions. If we're talking about hobbies, these are my questions, right? You can kind of just have a general list of ideas of things like, do you like it, right? What do you like the most about it? Is that something that you've always done? So, when you ask anything like, what do you do for fun? And they're like, I like riding scooters. Oh, what do you like most about riding scooters, right? Have you always ridden a scooter? Did you ride a scooter when you were little? See how it's kind of the same questions that we asked about the job. This kind of allows you to really dig a bit more and get to know them better, showcase that you're listening, and it gets it more into that conversation mode instead of an interview. So I think if you take these things, there's nothing wrong with practicing with a friend. If you're really nervous, like that's okay. If you take these things, I think you can really do a good job of eliminating some of these awkward silences and then being accepting and understanding of some of them, right? And realizing that it doesn't just mean, oh, it was a terrible date. So that's the tips I have for you today. If you have a second, if you enjoyed this content, if you want to get more of it and you want to support the channel, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button. It really does a lot for us, and it kind of helps us to be able to continue bringing this great dating advice to you. So thanks again, guys. We'll talk soon. Good luck on your first date.